In today's Conquering Codependency, God's Way, Healing from Narcissistic Abuse with Dr. Kerry McAvoy, Part 1. Ready? Let's do this. Hey there, and welcome to the Treasured Ministries YouTube channel. I'm Eileen Thompson, founder of Treasured Ministries, and especially if this is your first time, I am so glad that you are here. You know, God took me on a journey and broke me free from codependency. And you know something? I am not a psychologist. I am not a theologian. I don't have a seminary degree. But I am a woman who is walking free in God dependency away from codependency. And so we've created this playlist called Conquering Codependency, God's Way, where I am literally teaching you the things that God has taught me. Many of you have reached out to us and wanted information about narcissism. And so I wanted to reach out to experts in the field to bring awareness to this people type. And the reason is that we should all be aware of narcissists and be on our guard because of them. And so today, on our podcast, I have a very special guest with me. Dr. Kerry McAvoy is a psychiatrist and writer. She's an expert on cultivating healthy relationships, discerning narcissism, and understanding various other mental health-related issues. Her podcast, Breaking Free from Narcissistic Abuse, offers advice on trauma-related issues. And just recently, she has released a workbook, First Steps to Leaving a Narcissist. I will be leaving all of Dr. Kerry McAvoy's links for you in our YouTube description. And today, I'm going to be presenting you part 1 of my interview with Dr. Kerry McAvoy. She was kind enough to sit down with me and just answer some questions that I had on narcissism. And today, what we're going to be talking about are the types of people that a narcissist will target. And you know, oftentimes victims can falsely shoulder the shame. If you've been a victim of narcissistic abuse, that might be you. And what you're going to find out inside of today's interview, my part 1 interview with Dr. Kerry McAvoy, is that it's not what was wrong with you. It was everything that was right about you that made you a target for narcissistic abuse. In my opinion, awareness about the narcissistic nature is something every woman should have. And I really want to encourage you to spread this to your friends because awareness is key. When we are aware of this personality type, it helps us to set boundaries and not become a victim to narcissistic abuse. Take a listen to part 1 of my interview with Dr. Kerry McAvoy. Kerry Kerr McAvoy, welcome to the Live Treasured podcast and the Treasured Ministries YouTube channel. I am so grateful that you are here with us today.
Thank you so much. I'm excited about it too. Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about your podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just started it in April, and it's actually coming out of the TikTok Live. So about a year and a half ago, I started on TikTok, sort of trying to stumble around. I was getting ready to publish a book and wanted to build a platform and get a little more diverse. And I found that people love the lives. They love being able to talk about issues. And I realized that what I was struggling with, that what my book was about was, I thought at first it was about a trauma bond, and I knew I'd been in an abusive relationship. And then I kind of fell backwards into this area, this niche of narcissistic abuse, and realized that perfectly captured what had happened to me, and that's what my
Wow.
book was about. And as I started to speak about it, I realized that there's massive community, and now I know that there's estimates of 600 to 100 million people in the United States alone who are coming out an abusive experience, whether it's children or partners, that there is this need, this intense need, and the lives were so rich that I decided to repurpose them into a podcast.
Can you tell us a little bit about your story, your journey, and kind of what brought you to this place?
Right. Well, I grew up on a dairy farm in Michigan. I was the oldest of three girls, grew up in a very conservative evangelical home. I've loved God my entire life. He's been my best friend from as I was a little girl. I even have pictures of me praying out on the doghouse in the morning. I'd sit up on top of the roof and look out at the whole world and talk to God. So I felt very close to him that way. Got married young, got married right out of college. We had three lovely boys. We had a decent marriage. And then in 2014, right after Christmas, and as I was publishing my third devotional, which I've since named I've changed the name. I used to call it Pain as a Starting Point was the name of the title. It's now called Never Forgotten. But as I was wrapping it up and launching it, we were found out that my husband was diagnosed with duodenal cancer, which is small intestinal cancer. It's rare, no known treatment for it. They did surgery, the surgery failed, and he was gone 5.5 months later. So here was a strapping 51, 52-year-old man who literally almost like overnight went from healthy to gone.
Wow.
And with that, my entire life exploded. I was an empty nester. I closed my practice because this care was too intense. My life was blown apart and my faith went into this massive dark struggle. So in that struggle, I then, sort of struggled with God too about what was happening and his goodness and where was he and how could this happen to me? And I started dating really rapidly and I met somebody that I thought was like the most amazing person. It seemed to tick all the boxes. And it wasn't until we got married 2 months into it that I found that he was living a second secret double life.
Wow.
That I basically didn't know anything about him at all. And we stumbled around for 2 years trying to save the relationship while he was actually sabotaging it behind my back. I wasn't aware that the secret life never stopped. It just got more sophisticated. So it all sort of came crashing into bits just as my oldest son was diagnosed with leukemia, believe it or not. I know I had cancer hit a second time, which actually was a God moving and opening some doors for me, as awful as that sounds. And I started the healing process, started writing, and in this writing, that's when I began to put the pieces together, which is the ironic part because I'm a clinical psychologist. So why didn't I know any of this? How come I'm not aware that I was in an abusive relationship? And how come there wasn't more help for me? Why do so many people who go to therapy end up feeling blamed for what's going wrong? And it happened to me. I know, I fired 2 therapists.
Yes.
I fired 2 of them.
That is so true. I hear this a lot. Okay, thank you for saying that. I'm sorry for interrupting.
No, that's all right. So here I'm trying to make sense. I'm writing this book. It's my way of making sense. And then that's when I discovered, yeah, I knew he was a narcissist. Yeah, I knew that, but I had never heard what narcissistic abuse was or relational harm like that. And then that just opened up this whole like I literally felt like I was given new eyes. I suddenly could see things that I had never seen before. Motives and intentions made more sense. The confusion and the trappedness that I felt in that relationship started to it made sense why I was so paralyzed, and that's where I am today. Is that I now feel, this is where I am today. I feel such a burning passion about helping abused people get out of toxic relationships that it feels like a fire inside. I just feel lit up about it because I feel like people stuck in these relationships are prisoners.
Yeah.
And sometimes they have no idea that they're in a form of a prison, but I feel God's heart is so enraged over this and is so passionate about our wholeness and wellness. Yes, we'll
Yeah.
be made well in heaven, but I believe he wants us well today. I believe he
Right.
wants to be living well with integrity with each other today, and he's very, very concerned about that. So that's where
Amen.
I've been at, is working on this and trying to help people by increasing awareness.
And I love that, that it's been, a journey for you, and that now you're reaching back and helping others. And let's talk about the victim. That what can you give just a profile of who would normally get maybe attached inside of a narcissistic relationship?
Right, right. Well, there's a lot of myths. I want to start right there. There's
Okay.
myths. So, probably most of what you've been hearing is actually not based in research. The most accurate, up to date information is being done by Sandra L. Brown she's done some work out of Purdue University. She
Okay.
has an Institute for Relational Harm. She's been working with psychopathic, narcissistic population for most of her career. She's a social worker. In fact,
Okay.
I'm going to be interviewing her on November 10th.
Okay.
The evening of November 10th. It's open to anyone who's interested. They can get tickets to that and listen to her describe working with this population, as well as working with
Mhm.
victims and working with helping victims become safer, understand
Mhm.
the way that they've been profiled, and how to protect themselves better from this group of people. So here's the problem I think we all have.
Mhm.
We've been given this belief that the world is well intended.
Mm.
Yes, there are well-intended people in the world, but there's
Mhm.
also those who are not.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
but have we trained our children, ourselves, to differentiate between well-intended and bad-intended people?
Right. Right.
I know I wasn't, and I grew up in a
Mhm.
home with predators in it. It wasn't a very safe home, but
Mm.
yet despite that, I was still instructed to believe in the goodness of other people.
Right.
And as a
Right.
result of that, then I misunderstood and misinterpreted their moves and motives towards me. And I didn't
Mhm.
see the danger because I
Right.
assumed good things about them instead of assuming that there might be other reasons why they would do what they do. So,
Right.
so back to the victim. Victims tend not to know that there's not well intended people in the world.
Mhm.
But the current the current profile of a victim is that she's a
Mhm.
codependent,
Mhm.
people pleasing
Mhm.
woman who's come out of a dysfunctional home,
Mhm.
or she's had some form of trauma, and
Mhm.
that she's repeating this cycle by meeting a new person because it's familiar.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
that's a myth, but
That's a myth.
that's a myth.
Okay. Okay.
That's a myth. It's
Okay.
perpetuated everywhere. I can even tell you, Cassandra Brown, I got to hear
Mhm.
6 hours of her in a seminar training talk
Mhm.
about her research. She did some digging, and she found that this myth came out of domestic violence observations of the victims they were seeing. So it was anecdotal material, and it was
Mhm.
assumed to be foundational and true about all victims without
Mhm.
ever asking.
Okay. So unpack that a little more.
Yes.
So
What
it go
so in
ahead.
other words, when you see a population, you have to know, is this a representative population, or is it a unusual, is it a subgroup of the population? So
Okay.
people who go into domestic violence shelters would be a subgroup. I would
Okay.
not say that I could go pull randomly off the street 100 women and they would match up with 100 women going into a domestic violence shelter. They would be two very different groups of people.
Okay.
Do you see what
Okay.
I'm saying? They're a
Yes.
subset of the population. But what
Okay.
happened is they took that subset, made
Mhm.
some assumptions about them, and applied it to all people.
Okay. Okay. So
And
it's not all victims. Like there
yes,
might be some victims that are codependents and have come out of abusive homes, but
yes.
that's not everybody.
And I can even tell you the stats.
Okay.
37% of the women are that subgroup.
Okay.
So of
Okay.
every woman who gets into an emotionally abusive situation, 37% looks like that.
Okay. Okay. Which is a low percentage. I mean, I would
Yeah,
have thought it would have been much higher.
right. Me too. It's like one third.
So then are there more common characteristics of people who get, okay, so what are
Yes.
there?
So what she found was, okay, so how she did this, she took 600 couples,
Hmm.
pathological relationships,
Hmm.
gave them the ACE, which is it measures for childhood trauma,
Hmm.
gave them the ACE, took a detailed history of their childhood home
Hmm.
and their trauma history, and then she gave them a personality test called the Big
Hmm.
Five personality test, which, by the way, you and I could go take. There's
Hmm.
open source access to it, so if you're curious, you can go do that. What
Okay.
she found was overwhelmingly number of people, 63%,
Hmm.
had no significant trauma, did not come from a childhood traumatic home,
Wow.
and did not have an ACE score that was significant. None of them. 63% of them did. What they had in common
Hmm.
were two other things.
Hmm.
They were listed high on that Big Five test on agreeableness and conscientiousness.
Okay.
The
Okay.
things that would make you a good job candidate,
Hmm.
a good team player, you work
Hmm.
well with others, you're cooperative, you
Hmm.
believe in cooperation, you're loyal, you're
Hmm.
determined, you stick to things,
Hmm.
you all these qualities, you have a personal sense of integrity, you
Hmm.
believe in social justice. This is
Hmm.
what a person who has those two high traits is
Hmm.
like.
Okay.
They're targeting purposefully that group.
Okay. Narcissists target people
Yes.
who are always agreeable. So agreeable, and then what was the second characteristic?
Conscientious.
Conscientious. So when you're agreeable, that doesn't mean people pleasing. That
No.
means you have a high emotional IQ kind of,
Yeah,
or you,
yeah.
okay,
hmm
okay,
And it's
okay,
hardwired into you. It's part of your personality. It's not
okay,
something base. People pleasing is a survival mechanism people learn to grow up in a home where the emotional context is dangerous or uncomfortable. So
okay.
you learn to sort of soften the way that you show up in order to take care of the other people's emotions in the room.
Right,
So
right.
it's a
Okay,
skill that you learn. It's a skill that you learn. So,
okay.
but this is hard wiring. This is a person who's cooperative. I like the word cooperative better. They're a cooperative person.
Okay. So it's kind of like an aptitude that they're
hmm
maybe born with, that just
Yes.
okay, okay. And then wow, well, I mean, you've just blown me out of the water because I wouldn't have said that. I mean,
Yeah.
I have been a codependent, and so I always thought, okay, this is why I got into that narcissistic situation in my own life. But so then what does that tell us, that 60% are this way, only 37% come from that people pleasing trauma in the past? What does that tell us?
Yeah, well, it makes sense. So by the way, the oppositeness of let's define the opposite because I think it's really important. What's the opposite of agreeableness is antagonism.
Mm-hmm.
It's high
Mm-hmm.
high conflict. It's
Mm-hmm.
won't go with the group. Who's
Mm-hmm.
always the standout, the rebel.
Mm-hmm.
That's the opposite of agreeable. And the opposite of conscientiousness is a person who has no moral code. They live by
Mm-hmm.
what works in the moment and seeks pleasure, and they're impulsive.
Mm-hmm.
They
Mm-hmm.
and they and they have no particular loyalty to any code in life.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
so I think it's really important we paint the opposite because the group that's targeting the conscientious agreeable group is that group.
Okay.
And
Okay.
the reason they're targeting it is because they know that the agreeable conscientious people are going to be easier to dupe and
Mm-hmm.
stay in the dark longer, and
Mm-hmm.
they're going to stay longer, and they're going to try really hard to keep the relationship healthy,
Yes.
which
And
is
then
what they want.
right, because and they will even use that to their advantage by making the victim feel guilty through gaslighting or whatever, because what the victim doesn't want to feel is, I'm a bad person,
Yes.
right? So let me ask you this then, because I feel like that in our culture, women have been taught to be agreeable, right? To like get along, to not do everything. So are more women the target of narcissistic abuse than the other way around.
Oh, absolutely. Just partly just
Okay.
because antisocial personality disorder, which is psychopaths, sociopaths, are
Hmm.
predominantly men, as well as narcissists. Somewhere between 50 to 70% of all narcissists are male. So you already
Hmm.
have those two key groups who tend to be more predatory
Hmm.
are more male, which means there's more likely to be women. But I
Hmm.
think also culturally we're raised to be more agreeable.
Hmm.
There's a lot of pressure on us not to be too
Hmm.
autonomous or to be too
Hmm.
think to ourselves too independent. So yes, I do think that. And then here's the other reasons: predatory people tend to go through a lot of relationships. They tend to destroy them
Hmm.
pretty fast, so they
Hmm.
churn through more of them. So you're going to have.
Hmm.
So if it's a male, he's going to have a lot of female victims as a result of that.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And let me ask you this, Carrie. Um, does because I'm thinking about, okay, moral compass, agreeable, you know, um, for me, learning that God wanted me to set boundaries and looking at Jesus with fresh eyes, not the one that I was taught in Sunday school, like, oh, Jesus, love is always saying yes, like learning the difference between that and that Jesus was actually pretty abrupt and he, knew who he was and he stood for that and never backed down from it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not what I was taught in Sunday school. I feel like I was taught in Sunday school to be agreeable and to get along and all of those things. So do you feel like, in a sense, that perhaps the church has some religious rhetoric that keeps women or that makes women easier targets to narcissists? And I want to clarify, I'm not saying that this is what God wants, because I like when you start to read the Bible for you and you start to see Abigail and Deborah and Mary of Bethany, who said, Judas, I don't care what you say, I'm going to anoint Jesus with my alabaster. I mean, you start to see everything differently, but that, be kind can translate into be agreeable, and that wanting to be good and not feeling like there's so many women that come to Treasured Ministries. They want to do right by God. And so would that make you a victim to the
Yeah.
abuse as
Yeah,
well?
absolutely. I think that's what alarms me about the church, that I feel like there needs to be an awakening within our
Amen.
culture, but there needs to be awakening within church. What we do is when it's going wrong and bad, we don't go to the person who's usually the perpetrator of what's going wrong. We go to the compliant person and say, work harder, work harder.
Yes.
It's the wrong message, and she's not, or whoever, even if it's a he, they're not accountable for the other person's bad behavior.
Yes.
They can't save that person. They can't save what the person's failing to give or
Yes.
not give to that relationship. In
Yes.
fact, I heard a really great quote that helped me a lot near the end, and I won't be able to say it properly, but often divorce is a result of a failure that happened a long time ago by the other partner. We're
Yeah.
just manifesting what's actually has is what's been done long time. It's
Yeah.
the consequence of what's happened. And that
Yeah.
was so helpful for me because I realized the person I married never made a commitment, never made a vow to me, ever.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he said the words, but he'd spent a night with another woman the night before we married.
Oh,
He
Carrie.
walked in.
Wow.
He walked
Mm-hmm.
in already with a framework of this. There's no integrity to this relationship, and yet here I'm the one trying to preserve the vow of something there was never been any commitment to. I didn't know
Right.
that at the time, but
Right.
here I'm striving so hard for something that's non-existent. So but why is this like this? To me, I don't really have a good answer except to say that I think Satan is highly sophisticated, way more than we've ever
Yes.
give him credit for, and he's
Yes.
woven poison in,
Yes.
lies in throughout everywhere, everywhere.
Yes.
When I heard some of the huge ministries going down because of tremendous
Sexual
sin,
abuse,
exactly,
Ravi
sexual, oh,
Zacharias.
broke my heart.
It
That broke my heart.
it made me so angry.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I feel like what's happened is, what is women's role in God's economy? I think
Mhm.
that's a big question we need to ask and unpack.
Mhm.
I think there's a lot that we really need to unpack, but
Yeah.
unfortunately, this framework that we have right now is keeping women quiet and keeping them in relationships that are destroying their self-image, and
Yeah.
they are God's image bearers, and they're being destroyed, and I think that enrages God's heart.
Absolutely. For me, it was with a friendship for me. I felt stupid, like that this had happened to me. How could I be so dumb? So
Yeah.
you just feel, I guess, like I felt shame, like how could I have done this, or how could I have gotten into this situation? Do you hear that a lot from women? Did you experience
Oh,
that?
oh, tremendous shame. I had
Yeah.
tremendous shame, but it's tied back to our level of conscientiousness. We're people with
Yeah.
integrity.
Mate.
So, mm-hmm. And that's why we're chosen, because we are people with integrity, because that causes an internal conflict. We're going to blame ourselves first and not blame the partner or the friend or the coworker or the boss or whoever's causing the conflict.
Wow.
They're using,
Wow.
this is what my son said to me when when it was all over and I was getting ready to publish the book and I was feeling really uncomfortable about the content because it was, it might love you more is a graphic story of what happened to me. It's a just, I do not hide what my part in it. I don't hide what happens with inside of it. And I knew it was going to be uncomfortable for my sons to have this out there. So I had this big conversation and plus it cost me financially. It hurt me. And I said, I had this big moment. I said, you must be so ashamed. I am so utterly undone by what happened. And I began to weep in front of them. And they're grown men at the time. And the oldest, who was like 30, and by the way, he's recovered from cancer, so he's in remission, and we praise God for that.
Praise
But he
God.
looked at me and he said, Mom, don't feel bad. What happened to you was he used your best parts against you. This is on him. It was never about you. He used your best parts against you.
Wow.
Which
Somebody needs to
isn't
hear
that
that.
evil?
Yeah.
That is the epitome of evil, is
Yeah.
to see this naivete, this sweetness, this belief in people, and then leverage it for deception and exploitation.
Wow. Wow.
That's what happened to the garden. Eve was naive,
Yes.
and the
Right.
serpent took it, twisted it, and leveraged it.
Right. Against her.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. That's very powerful. And um, so if you're listening today and you feel, I'm in this abusive situation, or I was, and I've lost all this time, or this, or how could this happen? um, you know, release that,
Yes.
um, and just move on, and know that it was the goodness in you, that he was leveraging against you. And I think too, Carrie, because we know that the Bible tells us in Revelation 12 that the enemy has a special hatred for women. And so the very good parts about us, that he actually uses to go against, that is incredibly creepy. You know what I
It
mean? Like,
is. Mm-hmm.
really. And then I think it plays into, okay, I followed all the rules. I went to church. I prayed for a husband. You know what I mean? I followed all the rules,
Right.
and then this happens.
Right.
Um,
I want to stop you because there's another
yeah.
piece that you're missing that is super pivotal
Okay. Yeah, please.
that locks in that you're gonna let your mind's gonna be blown on this. So the people who have these two traits, agreeable, and by the way, Sandra Brown calls them super traits. She considers
Okay.
them lovely things.
Mm-hmm.
What makes us. She says the people who have them are high achieving, high functioning individuals.
Mm-hmm.
They're
Mm-hmm.
they're they're what makes you a good attorney, what makes you a good doctor, makes you really whatever you're doing, it makes you really good at it because you have a sense of honor to your job and respect and integrity, and you
Mm-hmm.
work well with your team, and it makes you a person that's highly sought after.
Mm.
But these two traits are extremely vulnerable to what's called cognitive dissonance.
Hey, thanks so much for listening in today. And remember, there's no shame if you have fallen into a narcissistic abusive relationship. It was not what was wrong about you. It is everything that was right about you. And again, awareness is so key. Every woman needs to be equipped with this awareness. And so for those reasons, I want to encourage you today to text, send this YouTube message out to your friends so that we can reach more women and equip them with this important information about discerning narcissists so that we can set boundaries and not get under their control. Thanks so much for listening in. And next week, I'll be publishing my part 2 interview with Dr. Kerry McAvoy. So subscribe so you won't miss it. Have a good day. Bye-bye.